It has been a big day in U.S. politics. So joining us now, CNN political commentators and Democratic strategist Dave Jacobson and Republican consultant John Thomas. Also with us, senior reporter for Politico, David Siders. Good to have you all with us. Okay, let's start with the first for this White House, the first presidential retraction of a presidential untruth. And if this original tweet hinting about the recordings, Dave, if it was an attempt to intimidate James Comey, then it backfired spectacularly.
Exponentially. I mean, obviously we know after that tweet came out, James Comey, because he testified last week about it, or a couple weeks ago, basically leaked the memos of his notes, of course, that sprung up this outside special counsel investigation. But look, it was Donald Trump that kick-started this whole speculation and controversy over these so-called tapes. It was also Donald Trump who said Mexico was going to pay for the wall. He also, by the way, said that he was being recorded by President Obama. This is the guy, of course, who creates falsehood after falsehood, and it begs the question of like why he's misleading the American public day after day. And that's why today Adam Schiff, who's the leading Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, of course, raised a question that, look, the response that we got from the president today raises many questions as it did answer answers.
Yeah, we'll talk to Norm Eisen of the Essex within the Obama administration a little later this hour about the legal implications.
Yeah, the other big news is that Trump was also talking to Fox News today, and he said that he was considering firing Robert Mueller, the special counsel. Here's what he said. Take a listen.
Should he recuse himself?
Well, he's very, very good friends with Comey, which is very bothersome. But he's also, we're going to have to see. I mean, we're going to have to see in terms, look, there has been no obstruction. There has been no collusion. There has been leaking by Comey. But there's been no collusion, no obstruction, and virtually everybody agrees to that. So we'll have to see. I can say that the people that have been hired are all Hillary Clinton supporters.
John, do you think President Trump is really considering firing Robert Mueller? Because if he actually does that, then that could be used as evidence of obstruction of justice.
Yeah, I mean, I doubt that he would get to that point. I'm sure he's frustrated that there's this special investigation going on. And in fact, the points that he's making, I'm sure he feels are accurate. Will it lead to termination? I don't think so. And to the tweet, I mean, I interpreted that completely differently. I thought it was he was telling Comey, you know, I hope you didn't wiretap me. That would be terribly unfortunate. I didn't think that he was saying, I have tapes.
But don't you think
You're the only one.
Yeah, you might stand alone on that one.
Well, one of very few numbers. I just want to bring David Siders in because, David, I mean, legally, for the president, it's a pretty steep hill to climb to try and fire Robert Mueller, isn't it?
Oh, I think politically it's a steep hill to climb. Republicans and Democrats alike in Washington hold that person in really high esteem, and I almost think that might be a bridge too far for the president.
But the acting attorney general would have to fire Mueller, and Trump would have to tell the acting attorney general to do it, right?
That's right. And that would be complicated for a number of reasons, not least of which the political support for those people.
What is your take, David, on President Trump's mea culpa? I mean, if you look back at his history, President Trump does have a history of making unfounded claims.
And it's so interesting how he resolves this one, right? One of the huge unfounded claims he's famous for making is the conspiracy theory about President Obama's birthplace, and the way he resolved that was with a big show, and that's the way he's handled a lot of other major announcements recently. And yet on this issue, he chose to do something with two fairly crafted tweets. He could have announced something in Iowa last night. He didn't do that. So I think this was a concerted effort by the president to put this issue to bed, and to do it on the day when many people are talking about something else instead, which is health care.
Yeah, it started with a tweet, but it may not end with a tweet. Dave, essentially the president has admitted he was bluffing, right? And that claim, or that bluff, will be heard around the world. You touched on this, the credibility issue. It'll be heard by North Korea. It'll be heard by China, by Iran, by Russia. And, you know, there will be a perception that when the president talks tough, those words are hollow.
That's where it's dangerous, because when it comes to our military operations, when it comes to life and death, when it comes to war or diplomatic relations with other countries, they don't know that Donald Trump's going to stay true to his word. And I think that really undermines his ability to perform as president for the United States to execute our agenda across the country, whether it's with our allies or with our adversaries. So I think it's a real problem for the Trump administration.
Trump's been more strong than Obama ever was in his presidency, dropping the mother of all bombs. I mean, he's pulling out. He's been consistent. He said he was going to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. He did. I think he's largely consistent. And in terms of showing force, I think foreign leaders and foreign terrorist sponsoring nations fear Trump far more than they ever believed or worried about President Obama.
But John, don't you think that what President Trump did, I mean, doubling down on this false claim and standing by it for 6 weeks, you know, and kind of, you know, dangling this out there, doesn't that damage the credibility of the presidency?
No, just terrible timing. I mean, he should have done this earlier. I don't know exactly why he waited. Some say because there's, congressional hearings that would demand that via subpoena that he turn over whatever the White House has. So he had to get rid of it now. This is something, look, President Trump's timing has never been great with this stuff. He should have done it early. There's no question about that.
The other thing I could just add, I think it undermines his justification when he blames all of these controversies on so-called fake news. I mean, this is fake news that we're getting from the White House.
Okay, you know, when I kind of agree with David initially that I thought that Trump made this admission on Twitter as a diversion away from the Republicans revealing their, you know, their draft bill on the health care reform Assurance Act, and but then I thought, well, that may be giving the White House too much credit. But anyway, so they released it.
And it is.
Yeah, okay, we agree on that one.
Yes.
Okay, bottom line here is that it cuts healthcare spending for lower and middle income earners, makes big cuts to Medicaid, gives a large tax cut to the wealthy. There is some provision here for financial assistance for those who can't afford the ever increasing cost of health insurance. You know, John, the president said that he wanted a health care bill that had more heart in it. But if you look through this, it doesn't seem that heart implants are actually covered by the Republicans.
Well, if heart means government subsidy, you're right. It's not. It doesn't have heart. What it does is shift a lot of the responsibility from the federal side to the state side. Allows states that know what their citizens need better than the feds to make those important decisions.
But 4 Republican senators are saying that they're not on board. Here's what Rand Paul had to say.
And I think the federal government shouldn't be giving any money to insurance companies. Insurance companies made $15 billion in profit last year. The new Republican bill will give them $110 billion to bring down prices. But to me, that's sort of a ludicrous economic concept. That would be like telling America new cars cost too much, so we're going to have a stabilization fund so your new car will cost less.
So, David Siders, is this bill going to pass, especially with Mitch McConnell trying to get this vote out on Thursday?
I think it's too early to tell, and I think the big turning point for this and what we should be watching for isn't today, but it's early next week when we get an analysis from the Congressional Budget Office. I think that will drive a lot of the late rush negotiations into the middle and end of next week, and then we'll know.
What's interesting, though, is that the president told Fox News he believes he can win over these 4 senators. Listen to this.
He certainly...
Healthcare is a very difficult situation. If you look, the Clintons tried to get it, and after years and years, they couldn't do it. Obamacare was murder for them to get, and now it's failed. It's virtually out of business. Obamacare is a disaster, and we're trying to do something in a very short period of time.
The interesting thing is that Donald Trump is now describing these 4 senators as his very good friends. This would be Ted Cruz and Rand Paul among them. Exactly. And Rand Paul with the funny moppy hair. But John, is the president actually actively involved in trying to negotiate this?
He is. From what I hear, he's going to help close this. They've delegated everyone else to McConnell, but these last 4, McConnell and the president, are going to try to tag team them, get it done. Remember, they only need 2. They don't need all 4. And Ted Cruz, I saw CNN interview him today, and he seemed open. He was involved in the formation of that document, and he seemed that he wants to get to yes. This isn't just an obstructionist play. If they can get it done, I mean, I think McConnell's feeling confident. He had a meeting later today on tax reform and how to drive that through. So I think they're looking after Georgia that maybe there's a little more wind behind their sails that can drive their agenda.
I think here's the political calculus. There's somewhat of a political tug-of-war that's going to go on right now because Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell are going to want to appease these sort of more conservative, extreme Republicans. But as you do that, simultaneously, you got to be cognizant of Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Rob Portman, Dean Heller, by the way. Rob Portman, who's from Ohio, John Kasich, of course, came out against this bill. So I think you're going to have this dynamic with this tug-of-war where as you sort of appease these conservatives, you're going to lose some of those more moderate votes on the other side of the aisle.
But the moderates always fold, don't they?
That's the question, right? Like a lot of these folks are vulnerable.
Squishy.
Yeah, exactly.
What about Trump's base, though, John? I mean, how do you think President Trump's going to get them on board, especially when we're talking about major cuts to Medicaid?
Well, I think the proof will be in the pudding. If it doesn't lower their premiums, they're going to hang him. If they feel a measurable, like that they get to keep their doctor, that their premiums or their insurance providers, they have more options, I think they'll be with him. The reality is he has to get something done here. If he doesn't, inaction's more dangerous than action here.
I think it's a balancing act, though. I mean, there is fresh polling that came out today by the Wall Street Journal and NBC that said 16% of Americans think that the GOP, at least the House bill, by the way, is a good idea, but simultaneously 41% say that they approve of the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare. So I think they're going to have to ultimately live or die by whatever they pass come 18.
There may be no recordings of the president's conversations with the FBI Director James Comey, but there is lots and lots of tape of Donald Trump during the campaign talking about health care like this.
Save Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security without cuts.
I'm not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid.
You're going to end up with great health care for a fraction of the price.
So, David Siders, is it a fair question to ask right now if the president ever intended to keep those campaign promises?
I think that that's a fair question, and I'm not sure that the voting public cares so much if he keeps those promises. I don't think that we're in the same political era that we were, say, 20 years ago, when it was maybe less common for a politician to get away with saying they were going to do something and then doing something else. The president has made it his MO to say things and then to change direction. And I think when that becomes your style and that's what the public becomes accustomed to, that's less of a liability. So I think that there are liabilities with the health care bill for the president, but I'm not sure that tape from the campaign is what the biggest liability is.
Fair point. President Obama weighing in as well. He posted something quite lengthy on Facebook, but I want to read just a part of that statement. He said, quote, "I recognize that repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act has become a core tenet of the Republican Party. Still, I hope that our senators, many of whom I know well, step back and measure what's really at stake and consider that the rationale for action on health care or any other issue must be something more than simply undoing something that the Democrats did." David Siders, will anyone in the Senate be listening to the former president?
I think that we'll hear from, when will the Senate be listening, will be later on this week and then next week. And I think that listening to the president is much less important than their districts. And these are Republicans who, whatever is in that bill, John is right. They need to come out and have something done when they face the midterms next year. And I think that that is really driving all of the discussion for them, as we saw in the House negotiations earlier.
Okay, we were saying it was such a big day for politics on Thursday, and then this happened.
All right. Unfortunately, you saw Sarah Huckabee Sanders walk up to the lectern there on the podium, but the White House rules are that none of the cable networks, none of the broadcast networks are allowed to carry this briefing.
Okay, so for the second time in 4 days, cameras were banned from the White House briefing. Live broadcast of audio was also banned. CNN played it in its entirety when we got it turned around. And we should note that on Friday, the briefing will also be off camera with Sean Spicer. But John, there is a pattern here with the administration ducking the spotlight in the middle of a big story.
You know, I was wondering about this because we talked about it last time I was on, so I spoke with some friends in the administration. Their take is that they're doing anything they can to cool the temperature level of those briefings because for them, they feel that they've lost control in terms of disseminating information, and it's about the reality show and the gotcha moments, and anything they can do to cool the temperature, and killing the video is one of those. I think that's an effective thing to do.
Sean Spicer said, he talked about why he thinks banning TV cameras was a good idea. He thinks it creates meaningful discussion. Take a listen to what he said on Laura Ingraham's radio show.
The nice thing about turning the cameras off sometimes, and I find this is that when it is not performance art, as you call it, that you end up having a more, I think sometimes a more substantive discussion about actual issues because they're not trying to get their clip. They're not trying to figure out how do I get on TV, how do I ask some snarky question.
David Siders, your reaction to what Sean Spicer had to say and how significant this move is by the White House?
It's interesting. I'm not sure that we hear from reporters that they feel that they're getting more substantive conversations with the White House given the recent blackout or the recent sound out. And so I think that there's reason to question that. The White House reporters, I don't think, feel that way.
Dave, the comment's been made that, this is an erosion of, access to the White House, to the message, and it's a double-edged sword. They cut the briefings down, they can't get their message out.
One of the core pillars of our democracy is a free, open, and transparent press. They ask the tough questions. They hold politicians' feet to the fire. That's what makes this democracy work, and that's why we are a beacon for democracy, democratic, a democratic republic for the rest of the world. These actions undermine our ability to function as an open and free country.
Okay, I very quickly want to finish up with Johnny Depp, who made some very controversial remarks at a film festival in the UK. Listen to this.
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president? I want to clarify, I'm not an actor.
Okay, so he was referenced to Abraham Lincoln, who was shot by John Wilkes Booth. He was taking questions from the crowd. He got a big cheer for that one. But, John, a pretty stupid comment to make at any time, even more so days after Republican congressmen
Scalise is still in the hospital. I mean,
came under fire from
totally
a
tone deaf.
You know, it's so tone deaf. I think the only thing that's, I'm not surprised to hear this coming from Johnny Depp. I don't hold him really in high regard to begin with, but I'm surprised that the audience didn't boo him for something like that. That's what's disappointing to me.
Dave?
Whether or not you like Donald Trump or you hate Donald Trump, that comment was flat out disgusting.
Yeah.
Final word, David Spears? Siders, sorry, David Siders?
I think I have to agree with your panelists. The remark was out of line.
Okay, and that is a good point where we'll leave it.